All right, well, first of all, I want to say thank you to the LastCon organizers for putting this all together. Kind of a big round of applause for those guys, please. When we go through our bios, we actually did something a little bit different. We let each other write each other's bios. So Mike McCabe is he's a former living socialite. He secured Rails there. He's a wannabe developer. And he plays the role of background for Apple's commercials. That's a pale joke.
This is Ken Johnson, also worked at Living Social. Builder, breaker, Ruby, fanboy, plus size model on the weekends. You can see his work in the Macy's catalog.
Thanks.
Also, he'll probably be staying around until after the sun goes down so he doesn't get a sunburn walking to the car.
Gingers don't have souls.
So why did we decide to focus on Rails, and why do people use Ruby on Rails? So whoever people aren't familiar with it, it's open source, so it's cheap, doesn't cost anything to get started. It's fast. Compared to other frameworks, Rails can take half as much time to build out a product compared to .NET or Java, and it's dry. So Ruby, there's a concept of don't repeat yourself, so you don't build a lot of the same code over and over again. Rails does a lot of the work for you, building everything you need in there, so you're not doing it all yourself.
Yeah, there's a lot of gems for code that you may want to write yourself, or gems that do things you may want to do, and the code's already written, so it makes it easy to kind of just make an app and get it deployed quickly.
So Rails is spreading. There are more and more companies starting to use Rails, or at least look at it to see if it's viable. Of course, there's the big names like GitHub. Twitter started using Rails as they moved to Java. Living Social, Groupon, of course, use Rails. But there are a lot of other companies you might not be familiar with, or you're familiar with, but might not know that they have kind of dabbled in Rails, including Amazon, IBM, JP Morgan, NASA. Capital One is another example. So more than just the startups are kind of looking at Rails to see if it's a good product. And you can look at the job trends around Rails to see its rise in popularity over the past couple years. Working at Living Social, I know all the developers got hassled all the time by recruiters because there's a lot of people working on Rails, but not enough people to develop in it. So, and I don't know if this is related, but this is a graph of the popularity of skinny jeans and jeggings, which sort of correlated to that last graph, but correlation isn't causation. I just like making fun of hipsters.
Determine that for yourself. So there's some demographics. We have some targeted demographics, and there's problems we're trying to solve with this product, and I do refer to it as a product. It's treated as such. So our first demographic is startups. Startups kind of fall into a few different categories: well-funded, modestly funded, and not at all funded. So in the latter of those categories, funding may be an issue. Buying training may be an issue, so I'm trying to make this free. For priorities, the priority of a typical startup is to build new features. It is to perform analytics and perform experiments to see what users like, and of course, make those conversion rates go up. Security is like that husky kid in dodgeball that never gets picked, or gets picked last. That's us. So the other demographic is the enterprise. And the enterprise, they have the funding, but not necessarily the resources. Training, policy, and software all geared towards sort of the .NET, Java, well-established frameworks. I think it's, personally speaking, lacking with Rails, Django, Node, and some Scala, and a few other frameworks. So to rectify this problem, we created Railsgoat. It's free. We like to think of it as high quality. It's visually appealing. It functions well. It's built for realism. It's an HR application. It can be easily enhanced. And of course, it's aligned with the OWASP top 10. So there are two videos we're going to show. The first video is an introductory video into just sort of what Railsgoat looks like, logging into it, and how to use it. All right. So at the very top, I want to point out that the tutorial credentials are easily accessible. One thing that's always bothered me is that I find it hard to find credentials just to even use an application when I look at a lot of these tutorial applications. So one thing we made sure to do was to put that right at the top and make it easily accessible. On the left-hand side, you'll see tutorials categorized by the OWASP top 10. Currently, it's 2010. We're in the works of creating a 2013 branch. You'll notice there are 4 distinct categories within each tutorial. There is a description, bug, solution for both attack and fixing the code. And then there's a hint, which is if you don't want to see the answer, if you just want to kind of, it's honestly like a riddle. If you want a riddle that kind of points you in the right direction, you can use just the hint. So, we highlight some of the attack portions and some of the fixes, make it pretty easy to read and to find. And then the last part here is we're going to log in, and there's one other thing I want to show you. So once we log in, you'll notice that there is, up in the top right-hand corner, there's a Railsgoat tutorial button. So we make it easily accessible to get back to the tutorials without actually having to log out. So once you hit that button, left-hand side, tutorials are there again, and you can hit back to the app and go and actually work with it and attack it. So that is that. So I'm going to explain this video first, and then I'm going to ask if anybody needs any clarification on what we're about to do, because I want to make sure it's very clear in what's happening. So this is sort of a teaser video of Railsgoat. We want to demonstrate that you can take pre-existing, exploits we've built in, you can chain them together, and you can sort of have fun with it, do your own thing. So we chain together a vulnerability where you can access any file on the file system. In this case, we pulled the secret token file from the Rails application. This is a standard file that's within most Rails applications. Some people have abstracted this out into an environment variable so that they can pull it in at runtime for security reasons, but more often than not, it's hard-coded within the application. So we're going to pull that secret token. We're going to review our current cookie as the user can. We're going to notice that there's a user ID of 5 associated with that user within the cookie. And then we're going to take that secret token, forge a new cookie where the only thing that changes really is the user ID is switched to 1, which is for the admin. And we're going to refresh and we'll be logged into the application as an admin. So are there any questions on exactly what is happening? I know that was a lot at once. No? Okay. So first we log in as Ken. And validate that we are logged in as Ken. And we go to the benefit forms. We're going to download the benefit form. We're going to intercept that request with our intercepting proxy of choice. Burp, it's awesome. And change that to the location of the secret token file. In the response, you'll see that there is a secret token returned. So now we have to use this to forge a new session. So first things first, we're going to go into the Rails console. We're going to start writing some code. That created a verifier instance, which allows us to generate that cookie. So we're going to take our pre-existing cookie logged in as Ken, copy that, and we're going to marshal it, base64 decode it, and then take a look. You'll notice with an arrow pointing to it is or not an arrow, there we go. User ID 5, and we're going to change that to user ID 1. And then we're going to generate that cookie with the user ID of 1. So the next step is to take our pre-existing cookie in Firefox, edit it, delete it, replace it with the new cookie we forged. We're going to hit refresh, and then we'll take a look at the left-hand side. You'll see there's benefit forms, and then once we refresh, there's an admin piece of functionality there, or link to the admin console. So that is that attack. Again, we've chained together a few different vulnerabilities in the application and used it in kind of a cool way, I thought. So, any questions so far? Okay. I'll hand it over to Mike.
So Railsgoat has it has the OWASP top 10 built into it, but of course we wanted to highlight kind of Ruby and Rails issues also. They have kind of some unique security issues. Mass assignment's one you've probably heard about. It's what led to the GitHub hack a couple years back where someone was able to add their SSH key to the Rails project and then change anything on the Rails project. Mass assignment's a pretty big issue in Rails projects. We see it a lot during our tests. But there's also other issues like constantize, which is it's a Ruby function, but it can lead to things like remote code execution. So we kind of built in some of these features into Railsgoat to show how those kind of issues pop up and to show how you can develop these things safer. So this video shows how to exploit mass assignment in Railsgoat. So basically what we're doing is using an intercepting proxy burp. We're updating our profile, or we're adding another parameter that is admin equals true. Setting that across, we update our profile, we refresh the page, and just like that, we're an admin. So mass assignment's a really easy but really powerful vulnerability. Really easy to exploit vulnerability, but really powerful, and it's very prevalent in Rails apps. And we kind of show how you can exploit that in Railsgoat.
We do show the Rails-specific manifestations of this, but we should point out that obviously mass assignment is not purely a Rails thing, and it takes different names in other frameworks. But I think some of the libraries with Node, Java Spring, frameworks like that.
So Railsgoat is also integrated with Brakeman, Bundler Audit, and Gauntlet. Brakeman is the de facto static analysis tool for Rails projects. It's developed by a couple guys at Twitter, open source, free. It's a really great tool, and if you're using Rails, you definitely want to be using Brakeman. Bundler Audit is a dependency checker, so it'll run through your gem list to see if there's any out-of-date or vulnerable gems you're running. And then Gauntlet is a regularization framework, so it's basically a way to automate security tests to beat up on your code. So you can automate Nmap or the various web scanners. You can even automate burp with it. So we've integrated those three tools so you can kind of see the security side of how to secure Rails applications. So this next video is going to show something that I'm pretty passionate about with this project, which is I want Railsgoat to be kind of the way that developers learn how to secure Rails applications. So secure code training is great, but I think a lot of developers get sick of sitting in a 4-hour class looking at PowerPoint slides of Rails issues. And so it's a lot more interesting for developers to kind of get their hands dirty and see how these issues pop up and fix them. So what's built into Railsgoat is a whole suite of tests using RSpec and Capybara, which is a HTTP library that basically exploits all of the vulnerabilities. And the point is for a developer to go in and fix those vulnerabilities and then rerun the test to make them all passing. So this is running rake training. This is going to run all the vulnerability tests, and you can see right now they're all failing. So that means cross-site scripting is there, command injection is there, mass assignment, all of that stuff is there. And you can see here, this is the list of the specs that ran. They all failed. So what you do as a developer here is you go in and you find these issues. You go find the cross-site scripting, for instance. You'd fix the issue, then rerun these tests, and that's how you kind of work through, figure out how to fix these issues. It's pretty similar to how test-driven development works. So here, I'm editing a view file, removing a method that creates the cross-site scripting. HTML safe is it's the dumbest named function in Rails. Then I'm rerunning the tests, and you'll see there are 14 failures and 1 pending. Pending in this case pretty much means passed. It's just the way we have it set up. But that's what a developer would do to kind of learn how to fix these issues. And it speaks to how developers work more than just a class of 4 hours of secure code training would.
Yeah, you're basically doing it in the language developers speak in the format that they're most comfortable with, so which is the important part.
Yeah. Another interesting thing is you can then use what you learned here to actually write tests to test for security issues. So at Living Social, we had a whole library set up just to test for security issues constantly. So we would know as soon as something popped up. So to get started with this, it's pretty easy. It's a Rails 3 app, SQLite database, uses jQuery on the front end. It's easy to get set up if you've ever run a Rails app before.
Or even if you haven't, I guess.
Even if you haven't. So in terms of contributing to the project, it's up on GitHub. You can find more details at railsgoat.cktricky.com. Submit issues, pull requests, if you want to add anything to it. Even if you're not familiar with Rails or Ruby, definitely just throw an issue in there for something you'd like to see, and we'll try to hack that in there.
Yeah, we do add contributors to the unofficial but official web page for this project, so enough code gets written, you get thrown up there.
So the project's still pretty young, but it's kind of picking up speed these days. We've added quite a few contributors lately, and we're just trying to add more all the time so we can make this a better product. So this guy tells you to come on and join the party. I don't know who he is, but in terms of support, we develop on OS X, so that's the best supported platform. Linux is generally supported also. It does break occasionally, sorry about that. We could use some help in regards to support on Linux. It's part of the OWASP broken web application, so you can just download that VM and get it running that way. We're going to set it up with Vagrant, so it's a lot easier to get the whole environment running very quickly. In terms of Windows, I hear Rails is a huge pain to run on Windows, so we're not focusing on that right now.
We have no love for Windows whatsoever.
Sorry. So if you're on Windows and you want to run this, just run it in a VM. So on the roadmap to add to Railsgoat, we want to add the OWASP top 10 from 2013. There's a couple changes there that we need to make. That's probably our next big change to Railsgoat. More unit testing, showing more examples of the vulnerabilities. We have kind of one of each, but we want to add more unit tests to show how different things pop up. The different types of cross-site scripting, how command injection could pop in different areas, and more of the Ruby and Rails specific vulnerabilities. Another big issue with Rails projects is gems. So you're not only depending on the application that someone wrote, you're also depending on all the gems that you're using, and those quite often have vulnerabilities in them. So you have to dig into the code base of the application and the code base of all the gems, which can be 100+ gems in some large projects. So the code base can be huge. We kind of want to add vulnerable gems to show how that happens and how you have to dig even further into the abstracted code.
Yeah, I mean, in our experience most recently your experience with Devise, if it taught you anything, that it's incredibly easy to misconfigure some of these even security-centric gems. So.
Yeah, Devise is an easy one to shoot yourself in the foot with. And of course, we want to add more vulnerabilities just in general, so business logic flaws, more Ruby and Rails specific issues, and then also a lot of cryptography issues. People tackle crypto and Rails pretty often and don't do the best job. So we want to kind of show examples of how that can go wrong. Also, Rails has 3 major versions. This is a Rails 3 app, but we also want to support Rails 2 and 4. Rails 2 is pretty old in terms of the Rails world, but there's still a lot of kind of legacy code that's running on Rails 2. Rails 4 is brand new, but it introduces some kind of nuanced security issues that weren't part of Rails 3. So we're going to try to build branches for both Rails 2 and 4 to show how those issues pop up in those different versions. We're also going to add some moderate and advanced tutorials. So for the more advanced Rails programmer who already knows what cross-site scripting is, we want to add something that's a little more interesting for them. More Ruby-specific vulnerabilities outside the top 10. We talked about mass assignment, constantize. There's some other interesting ones like 2sim, more metaprogramming issues. If anyone's not familiar with metaprogramming, it's code that writes code. It's kind of one of the selling points of Ruby. Open classes, you can rewrite everything. You can monkey patch Rails and add in functionality that is horrible. It's a great thing, but it's also a bad thing, and it pops up quite often in Rails projects because people hack Rails to do what they need to do in their example, but it ends up adding a lot of vulnerabilities. And we want to add functionality so we can add more vulnerabilities.
So this is a pretty short presentation, and we purposely did that. Only for the fact that every time we've done this presentation at OWASP chapters and whatnot, folks usually have some questions. Sometimes they're regarding devise and omniauth, which, to be clear, we are adding those into this product. But sometimes it's sometimes the questions are just they're in depth or they're cursory, but they're always different. So we want to open it up to everyone to just ask questions. We'll throw up code if need be on the fly. And yeah, curious if anyone has any questions. Sorry, what was that?
Oh, Burp Suite.
So he asked the web proxy that we were using. Yeah.
Burp Suite by Portswigger.
It's actually really useful. So as security people, we're really, well, there's a few different proxies out there, but it's not just a security tool. Honestly, I use it when developing because it makes my life a lot easier than doing like curl commands or messing with Chrome and Safari developer tools and whatnot. So it's pretty useful.
Yeah, there's a free version of Burp that's pretty good. The pro version's like $200 and adds a decent bit of functionality.
I just say I'm surprised there was no questions on the session forging, but maybe you guys really know that, so in and out. Any other questions? Really?
Are there any Rails developers in this room right now?
Couple. Okay then.
What's your future plans for Railsgoat?
The question was, what are the future plans for Railsgoat? So, we talked a little bit about some of that stuff. I think we covered sort of the things we're doing right now. There has been a question of, do we want to create multiple branches for the different functionality we want to add in? For instance, we've created authentication from scratch within this application. And that can be, great for us to show like, hey, you probably shouldn't use MD5 hashing. However, for folks that have questions regarding devise, it's a little bit hard for us to build in both devise and authentication from scratch, obviously. So there's a question of whether we create a different branch or there was templates.
You can use Rails generators to kind of add various gems, and then it just builds out it's a mountable engine or a generator that builds out the application for you. So we're thinking about tinkering with that, so you can choose from 5 different options. You can choose to use the homegrown authentication, or you could use devise. There's also some interesting gems out there that add kind of admin functionalities that plug on top of your Rails app, like Rails admin, which adds a whole admin interface to your app, which can lead to some serious issues because it's basically direct access to your database. So we're going to try to slowly add those things. It's hard to add everything because there's thousands of gems, so it's kind of picking and choosing which best represent what's out there and trying to keep it realistic.
So whether we do it in a different branch or different branches, and whether we do it in varying templates, still to be decided. There's also configuration settings that folks still don't know about. And for instance, in Rails 3.2, there is a JSON encoding setting within the primary application configuration setting. And actually, I found a lot of people don't realize it doesn't actually currently HTML. Like Rails in 3.2 completely ignores that configuration setting. So when people call something like .toJSON method on content, it's not actually being properly HTML encoded upon output, which results in your jQuery, executing that and XSS. So these things need to be covered. And then I think the last thing was, sort of big thing was CSP. You want to talk a little bit about CSP and what Neil's doing?
Yeah, Neil at Twitter, I'm going to butcher his last name.
Matadal.
I don't know how to say it.
It's a hard one.
NDM on Twitter. He's a big fan of CSP, content security policy. It's a really interesting spec, but it's also kind of difficult to implement. It can actually, it's a header, but it can turn into like 30 lines long if you add a lot of whitelists and blacklists and all these kind of things. So we want to add some more of that kind of stuff. So the various security headers, CSP would be an interesting one, and kind of show how a security header can actually end up biting you if you configure it incorrectly. So there's a lot of, I mean, we really have the issue of too many choices. There's so many different things we could do with this project. We want to keep it realistic and keep it to kind of what's popular in the Rails world. So we have to be careful about what we do add and not make it just a huge garbage pile of various functionality that doesn't work at all.
Yeah, it's fun for us, and it's fun for folks to get to use it, but we actually want to make it useful to developers, since that's sort of our key demographic here, is to help those folks out. Security folks, some of this stuff may help you when you perform static analysis. I'm sure it will, but I think we're really focused on making Rails applications more secure. I mean, we spent a decent chunk of our career over the last couple years doing that, and we still do it. So, yeah, it's a passion, I would say, at this point.
Yeah, and like I talked about with the specs, we want to add more of that and make it a really easy-to-use tool for developers to learn how to secure their applications. Living Social is actually using it as their training tool, so they have their in-scope PCI developers actually run through this tool and fix it, and that's their evidence for training. So it's actually being used in various places for training, and that's where we want to keep pushing it and get it in front of developers and kind of tweak it so it works well for them to learn about these issues and how to fix them.
Yeah, that's kind of my next question. Like, how do you find it's being picked up with the Rails communities, across the? Just like, how's that been going?
Decently well. I mean, since we worked at Living Social, we do quite a few of the developers over there, of course. So we've been kind of pushing it with them. It's still kind of a new project, and so we're trying to get it pretty solid before we're kind of really spreading it everywhere. But we're just doing presentations at Ruby and Rails groups in the DC area. Doing a presentation here, of course. So I mean, it's tricky in the Rails world. Security is important, but it's not always thought of that important in that world. So Rails developers like to build stuff, not go back and maintain and always fix the security issues. So it's kind of a tough nut to crack, but we're just getting in front of people and showing them how easy it is to use, and that kind of gets them bought into the project.
Yeah, I mean, we've got early adopters. That's kind of what we're going for, right? An early adopter model. Tell us what you hate, tell us what you like. We figure it out, implement it, or folks help us. And then I will say that the feedback from the Rails folks we've brought this to so far, it's actually been surprisingly, and I say surprisingly because security bringing our take on things to development groups, it's not, in my experience, always been necessarily like, oh, thank you. More so, all right, I guess I've got to do that. But actually, surprisingly, we've had a great response. People have been thanking us. So from the Rails community, at least the small chunk that we're hitting with early adopters. So it's been pretty good. So.
Yeah, and I think as more, there are a lot of startups out there using Rails, but as larger companies use it and they already have policies for the other frameworks, they're going to need something, and so I think there's going to be more adoption there because those companies kind of have a requirement to do security and training versus startups don't always have that requirement. So,
I think that's. Are there any other questions?
So I know this is really space, but if I was a Sinatra developer, is there anything that I could use for that?
Yeah, the question is, as a Sinatra developer, which is another Ruby framework, it's a rack-based framework. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the same issues pop up in Sinatra as they do in Rails. All of the Ruby issues, so like constantize, 2sim, the DOS vulnerability, mass assignment, if you use active record with Sinatra, which I've seen quite a bit. So yeah, a lot of that stuff, and of course the OWASP top 10 still happens in Sinatra. Sinatra doesn't have output encoding built in like Rails does, so cross-site scripting is definitely going to be an issue for you if you don't look out for it. Of course, Sinatra's used mainly for APIs.
I mean, like the Weasel diesel generator for it, by Matt Amonetti a couple years ago had some issues just in how it handled unexpected parameters that were entered. It was just echoing those parameters right back. Just like little things like that have improved over time, but there's still these Sinatra application generators essentially out there that kind of live in between, they're middleware, so they live in between, they handle the requests and act accordingly with them. So those have issues. The gems, like you said, some of the same gems are used. Not necessarily like, well, actually, yeah. I mean, if you've got a Sinatra app that's talking to a database, some folks choose to use Active Record in there. So those things still apply, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a lot of the same issues. So you can learn from this and then apply those to Sinatra. Actually, interesting idea would be to mount a Sinatra app inside this to kind of show some of those issues. So, which is something we could do.
I like that. That's cool. Anything else? Any other questions? Cool. Well, I will say,
Thanks a lot.
before we say goodbye, I want to give a special thanks to Chris Morris from Living Social, who's been adding a lot of code around unit testing, helping us out with that. And then Jim Manico actually allowed this project to get off the ground. I know he's had a hand in getting PyGoat off the ground. It's a Python kind of version of this. And then just one more person I'm missing. Well, I guess I'll just thank you, OWASP attendees. So that's it. That's all we have.